Good afternoon, guys. Rich here, Keto Pro. Keto and cholesterol, a nutrient for concern? Question mark. Now, cholesterol is one of my favorite topics to chat about. It is something that I have studied extensively, as it is one of the biggest concerns I hear from people wanting to begin a ketogenic lifestyle, and indeed from people outside of the keto community. We are taught as a society to fear cholesterol, and this is unwarranted, I believe. So I've recently written a paper which I published to my website, and I've put this into a little slideshow for you guys because everything is easier to understand with graphics. So let's dive straight in. So this is a statement that was released in 2015 by the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, and quite simply they reported that cholesterol is not a nutrient of concern for overconsumption, which will probably shock many of you, but not me. I love cholesterol. So why? Now, cholesterol is imperative for life. We can't live without cholesterol. But what is cholesterol? Now, cholesterol is produced by the liver, and it is also made by most cells within the body. It is carried around in the blood by little couriers called lipoproteins. Now, we need cholesterol as it's an essential component of cell membranes, which are the structures that border the cell in the human body, every cell within the human body. Without cholesterol, T cells, for example, would not maintain their cell membrane, leading to the rupturing of the cell. Now, cholesterol makes hormones like estrogen, testosterone, and adrenal hormones. It also helps our metabolism work efficiently. For example, cholesterol is essential for the body to produce vitamin D, which is required for a good immune system. It produces bile acids, which help the body digest fat and absorb important nutrients. Cholesterol allows the arteries and veins to withstand the pressure of the blood flowing through them and heals them after injury. It is essential for the immune system. Immune cells rely on cholesterol. It fights off infections. Now, LDL binds and deactivates bacterial toxins. For example, the MRSA bacterial toxin does not destroy red blood cells when LDL is present. And it has been found that higher cholesterol levels in the blood increase post-surgery healing. Now, this is something that I can attest to personally. So these images were taken following a recent operation that I had on my shoulder. The operation meant that I had to leave the wound open, which had to be packed daily, which involved tweezers going inside the wound, forcing this gauze stuff in there, which wasn't a pleasant experience, I can tell you. Now, I was told to expect a 10 to 12 week healing period. Now, as you can see by these images, my wound healed in a little over 3 weeks, which is quite astonishing. So that's 9 weeks quicker than was expected. And in fact, the nurses that were dealing and packing this for me every day said that they had never seen an injury heal so quickly. And as you can see, my cholesterol is double figures. And yes, most of it is LDL. So if LDL is so good, why are we told to fear cholesterol? So it was once believed, and unfortunately still is by many, that high cholesterol would build up on the walls of the arteries, causing a process called atherosclerosis, a form of heart disease. Now, where in some sense this is true, we need to look a little deeper. The body is a highly efficient machine that wants to be fit, healthy and heal. So why would it produce something that would damage itself? Well, quite simply, it wouldn't. Now, LDL is often touted as bad cholesterol, but I don't understand why. LDL is protective. LDL is sent to repair damage to the arterial wall to protect the body. Now, that doesn't sound so bad to me. The question here, I believe, is what's causing the damage in the first place? So this image here shows, this image by chemical engineer and nutrition expert Ivor Cummins, shows the damage caused to the glycocalyx, which is the arterial wall's first line of defense, following a high carbohydrate meal. Now, the glycocalyx has been completely destroyed by blood glucose, exposing the endothelium, allowing LDL access for repair. Now, we are told to eat little and often, But as this image shows, it takes 8 to 12 hours to recover from a high carbohydrate meal, meaning we are constantly causing damage that requires more LDL for repair. Now this has been echoed by this graph, which was another study. So this shows, this study was performed on endothelium glycocalyx exposure to elevated blood glucose for 6 hours. And as you can see, it shows a significant drop in glycocalyx volume. Now, this image here shows 3 particles, VLDL, IDL, and LDL. But in fact, these 3 particles are indeed the same particle. So the liver produces and releases LDL, but it begins its journey as VLDL, which are very low density lipoprotein. VLDL circulate the body, releasing their lipid cargo along their travels in the same way as a bus would with passengers, becoming smaller and smaller along their journey, resulting in the VLDL particle becoming an IDL particle, an intermediate density lipoprotein, and eventually an LDL particle, low density lipoprotein. Now once the bus, or the LDL particle in this case, has finished its route by releasing its cargo, it will return back to the liver for recycling. Now each LDL particle contains an ApoB100 protein, which is a receptor that is recognized by the liver. It is this receptor that allows the LDL particle access to the liver. Without it, LDL cannot be recycled. Now, the consumption of carbohydrates leads to glucose in the blood. Excess glucose causes this ApoB100 protein to become glycated by binding to this receptor site, blocking the receptor, and with it, the liver's ability to recognize it, meaning the liver won't allow it access for recycling. So it continues to circulate in the blood, growing in number. Now, as well as glycated LDL particles, we can get oxidized LDL particles. This again can be caused by insulin resistance, high blood glucose levels, and through things like oxidized linoleic acid from vegetable and seed oils. Fully oxidized cells also lose their ability to be recognized by the liver, as this also blocks the ApoB100 receptor. So like glucose, these oxidized particles also damage the glycocalyx lining the arterial wall. This damage causes a widening of the tight junction proteins between the epithelial cells. This allows oxidized and glycated LDL particles to travel to the subendothelial space. Now within this space, there are cells called macrophages. These macrophages contain a receptor called a scavenger receptor. This scavenger receptor will recognize the glycated and oxidized ApoB100 receptors when the liver could not, and allow them access. The macrophage will take in these oxidized LDL particles and cram them in until they increase greatly in size, leading to the creation of something called a foam cell. Now, foam cells are the creation of calcification in atherosclerotic plaques. Now, chronic consumption of carbohydrates can cause insulin resistance and a large increase in inflammation. Now, this inflammation causes further damage to the arterial wall, requiring more LDL for repair, further allowing these oxidized and glycated particles to be consumed by the macrophages, leading to further calcification. So, I think we'll take a look at this this chart here now. So this shows the different types of LDL, and we can split them into 2 basic categories: pattern A, non-oxidized or healthy LDL, and pattern B, oxidized or damaging LDL. So it is these oxidized and glycated or pattern B LDL particles that are causing the damage. Pattern A wants to heal the body. Pattern A is essential for life. So the question is, how can we tell the difference between whether our LDL is indeed pattern A or pattern B? Now, quite simply, your doctor from a cholesterol test should be able to tell you this, but if you have your test, then you can get a pretty good idea from this flow chart. So this flow chart here shows triglycerides less than 0.5, then that's good. That means that your LDL is more likely pattern A. HDL greater than 1.5 means that your LDL is more likely pattern A, and if you apply the triglyceride to HDL ratio and that number comes in less than 1, then your LDL is more likely pattern A. Now, if you have no to any of these, some or all of your LDL could indeed be pattern B. So this is something that you'd need to check out. So I can see you guys are still not convinced about LDL. So let's take a look at this study. So this study here now is published on the BMJ. Now they looked at 19 cohort studies with a total of over 68,000 elderly people and the relationship between LDL and all-cause mortality. Now the result from the study showed an inverse association between all-cause mortality and LDL, representing a massive 92% of the participants. So what does this mean? Quite simply, this means the lower your LDL, the higher your risk of death, which is the opposite to what we've been taught for the last sort of 50, 60, 70 years. Now the interesting thing here is that the study didn't account for pattern, at least I don't believe, didn't account for pattern A and pattern B LDL. So if we can assume that most people in the study with higher levels of LDL consume lots of carbohydrates, which would result in pattern B LDL, we could assume that lots of these people, lots of these participants had oxidized bad LDL. Yet even their chance of living longer with this LDL still was statistically significant. So our view on LDL has to change. A non-glycated and non-oxidized LDL particle causes no harm. In fact, a healthy LDL particle is very good for us. A healthy LDL particle is protective, and this is what heals the body. We shouldn't fear high LDL. We should be promoting it. So many of us still live in the fear of saturated fats, and we live in the fear of consumption of saturated fats in fear of raising LDL. Now, would you believe, despite this notion being around for over 50 years, there is still very little scientific backing for this. However, there is an abundant amount of studies to show the opposite. So this is a double-blinded, randomized controlled trial that looked at heart disease in 3 groups: vegetable oil and olive oil intervention groups, and a control group consuming mostly saturated fat. The trial lasted 2 years, and the results showed that 5 people died in the vegetable oil group, 3 in the olive oil group, but only 1 in the saturated fat group. So this is another study. Now this study included 2,412 patients, so not a small study by any means. It was a meta-analysis to question the association between dietary intake of saturated fats and the risk of cardiovascular disease. Now the conclusion of this study reads as follows: there was no association between dietary intake of saturated fatty acids and incident coronary events or mortality in patients with established cardiovascular disease. So just to reiterate, there was no association between dietary fat intake and risk of coronary events or mortality in patients with established cardiovascular disease. Let's take a look at another. Now this is probably one of the most compelling reports. Now this is the Minnesota coronary experiment reevaluation, published again on the BMJ. Now, this is highly compelling. This was a double-blind, randomized controlled trial designed to test whether replacing saturated fat with vegetable oil rich in linoleic acid would reduce coronary heart disease. Now, this trial took place in 6 mental hospitals, so consumption of food was closely monitored, or in fact monitored exactly. Now, the study included 9,423 people, and these patients were split into 2 groups. One group had high saturated fat in the diet, and the other group replaced saturated fats with vegetable oils. Now, the idea here was to lower cholesterol and improve cardiovascular disease. Now, what the study reveals was hidden for many years because those performing the study did not like the results that the study showed. The study did indeed show that the groups using the vegetable oil had lower serum cholesterol, but this group had a higher mortality rate than the saturated fat group, which basically means this study shows that lower cholesterol increased risk of death. So blaming cholesterol for cardiovascular disease is like blaming a firefighter for starting the fire, as there's a firefighter at the scene of every fire, just like cholesterol at the site of atherosclerosis. But the cholesterol is there to heal the body. We shouldn't be fearing cholesterol or saturated fats. Saturated fats do not clog arteries. Heart disease is a chronic inflammatory condition, inflammation and insulin resistance caused from the overconsumption of carbohydrates and vegetable and seed oils, which can easily be reversed and controlled through a healthy lifestyle. Now, in my opinion, and as the science tells us, eating this way, or eating the way that our ancestors did, and living a ketogenic lifestyle, consuming lots of saturated fats and proteins from high quality grass-fed animal sources, while heavily restricting or completely removing processed foods, grains, vegetable and seed oils high in oxidized linoleic acid, is the best way to keep a healthy immune system and prevent chronic illness, autoimmune issues, inflammation, glycation, oxidative stress and cardiovascular disease. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you.